Hi, welcome to the ultimate guide to fingerboarding for beginners. In this video, we're going to cover everything you need to know on how to start fingerboarding or progress it if you've just begun. We're going to look at edge size, we're going to look at grip positions, how often you should fingerboard and when you should do it, and also the most important reason of why you should do it. So fingerboarding is a really useful tool to improve finger strength. So that means the muscles in your forearms and the tendons and ligaments in your fingers. We're going to be using this tool alongside any climbing or whilst you're at home or at the climbing wall to help improve your finger strength in a really controlled manner. If this is you beginning your journey into fingerboarding, one key rule that I try to uphold is that you're not going to be reaching failure during any of the training exercises. So if your fingers are opening out or slipping off, then that means the intensity is too hard. So keep remembering, if I'm failing during any of these exercises, I need to reduce the intensity and make sure I complete it safely and with a little bit spare in the tank. So how do we change the intensity of your fingerboarding? Well, there's a couple of different methods. One is the edge size and use. You can see on the fingerboard behind me, there's loads of different edge sizes available. You might not have this much at home, so you need to choose the edge which you can hang comfortably and complete the amount of training you want to. I would personally recommend fingerboarding for beginners that you need to be hanging around body weight. So that means you might need to use a bigger edge than you might see other people using in their training. That still means you can get a really good strength training stimulus, but it also means that you have to do a lot less to remove weight from your body or any complicated calculations regarding changing the load in use. If you only have a small edge available, or you're trying to progress and you've only got either a jug or a smaller edge, there are a couple of methods of changing the load of your training. So a couple of options is one, to use a pulley system. So that might mean a harness on and then using a rope to a counterweight. Two could be putting your foot on a chair or an object underneath the fingerboard, but just make sure that it's nice and clear. And even though you shouldn't be failing, you want to make sure it's safe to do so. Or three, putting your feet on the ground, but trying to reduce the amount of weight that you're putting through your feet so you get the right strength training stimulus. So that means it's really, really hard, but you're not failing at all. So when you're starting off fingerboarding, what grip position should you use? You'll probably hear loads of different grips that people throw around. So to give you a quick overview, we've got everything from full crimp, which means your thumb's wrapped over, half crimp, which means that your fingers are at 90 degrees, particularly this last joint here is nice and straight and then 90, and then you're holding that same position without the thumb involved. You might hear this being called a chisel as well, or an open grip position for 4 fingers. And you can usually see the index finger is straight, but the other fingers might be quite bent. I've got quite small pinkies and small index fingers, so the rest of my fingers look quite bent, and that is normal. And then we've got front 3 finger drag, so that's front 3 open hand. And a lot of people do like this when they're starting out climbing, so I'll keep that in there. Whenever you see a lot of other people fingerboarding, you'll see their fingers look quite different. And just remember, the length of your fingers changes the grip position. So don't always judge on what everyone else is doing and worry too much about what you're doing. The main thing is just what to use and how it feels. So what do we recommend? Well, personally, I'd always go for the number one rule is that you go for whatever you feel comfortable doing, as this is your beginning journey. So that usually means being between 4 fingers on, so you're spreading load between all 4 fingers, and being between an open grip or a half crimp position. A full crimp is going to be quite intense for you to begin with, and it's something that we don't really recommend doing because it's going to put a lot of strain through this joint here. Front 3 drag can be quite comfortable and you can gain a lot of strength like this, but actually what it does, it trains you to only use that grip position and it's not as transferable to other skills. So we always recommend trying to go for 4 fingers, mixing between either a half crimp or open, whatever you feel most comfortable to do. Until you get to quite a high intensity, you can just keep using whatever you prefer to do. But as you start to progress and become more comfortable, try and mix up those 2 grip positions and share the training between the 2. Half crimp ends up with a lot of load going through your forearms, and it is a really good way to get more strength, but it puts a lot more stress on your tendons and joints. So please make sure that you feel like you're built up to that if it's not comfortable for you naturally. So in terms of training protocols, this is quite the interesting bit on how to do it properly. You might see on a lot of training apps or on recommendations from other coaches to do bodyweight repeaters, and that's what a lot of people do to start off with. But please remember, if you're holding less than body weight for a maximum hang for sort of 5 to 10 seconds, repeating that effort multiple times is going to be a little bit too intense to begin with. So please make sure that you're bringing the intensity back that's right for you. Like I said, you need to complete every set and rep that's been chosen for you. So that's really important, and that's the first and foremost rule. So 2 different sessions which I think are really useful, and you can change the load appropriately, is 1, max hangs, and 2 is doing repeaters. So a good max hang protocol is doing 10 seconds a hang and around 2 minutes of rest in between, and we're going to go for around 6 sets. Like I said before, we need to try and hang from the appropriate edge size, and you can reduce the load as needed. So in this example, you can see me do it with my foot on a chair just to make sure that I'm getting the intensity right. However, most of the time I'm going to be choosing an edge size where I can hang just from my body and complete the same amount of sets. The second session I think is really useful is to do repeaters. And a good way of building up to this is by doing 5 seconds of hanging, 5 seconds of resting, and you repeat this 3 times. So it ends up with a 30-second set. So 5 on, 5 off, 5 on, 5 off, 5 on, 5 off. That's 30 seconds. And then you're going to have around 1 to 2 minutes rest between that. Once again, I can change the intensity of this by either using one of those methods mentioned earlier. The easiest one is to just keep your feet on the floor, and you're going to bend your legs to remove weight from your legs and put more weight on the hands. But it means you can get the intensity right. If you feel like your fingers are opening out or slipping off, you need to make sure that you stand up a little bit more and remove load from the fingers. You can do around 3 to 5 sets of this, so it's going to be quite a lot of volume in total, a lot of hanging time. So each individual hang needs to be at a relatively low intensity for you. So this often means that your feet might be on the ground or using a chair, one of those other methods. So it's quite hard to answer the question of how often you should fingerboard when you're beginning your journey doing this. Right now, with a lot of people training at home, it might mean that you want to do a little bit more than you're used to in the past, or you have more time to do it. I'd really recommend not doing more than 2 or 3 sessions a week if you're not doing any other climbing, because even though you might have the energy to, it's going to put a lot of load through your fingers, even if you keep the intensity quite low, because you'll be using the same grip position on the same holds all of the time. So 2 to 3 sessions absolutely maximum if you're not doing any other styles of climbing right now. Most of the time, a lot of people make loads of gains by doing 1 to 2 sessions a week. And just remember, if you do 6 sets of max hangs, that's only 1 minute of effort. So as long as you complete all of the sets and reps and the intensity is a level that you can manage, it should be a really good training stimulus, but it won't overload you too much. The main thing is just make sure you complete all the sets and reps and you don't go to failure, because if you're doing that, that's when you're going to start pushing over the limit. So 1 to 2 sessions a week if you're doing other climbing, and if you're not doing much more, I still wouldn't recommend doing more than 2 to 3 sessions a week. A couple of key safety tips on what to look out for on different grip positions is 1, if you're using a half crimp, so this 90-degree position, if you're under load and it starts to open out, so your fingers are creeping open like this, that's going to put a lot of stress through the soft tissues in your fingers. So you need to make sure that you finish the hang and class that as a failure. So the intensity is too high. So put your feet on the ground, stop the hang, rest and wait for the next set and reduce the intensity. If you're using an open position like this with the fingers straight and your pinky starts to slip off and you start to open out, then once again that's classed as failure and the intensity is a little bit too high. So put your feet on the ground, rest for the rest of the set and make sure that you reduce the load for the next set of training. So what is the best hanging position? This will slightly change depending on whether you're using additional load or assistance, but there's a couple of key elements that stay the same throughout. One element is the shoulder position. That needs to be somewhere between fully engaged, so really far away from your ears, and fully disengaged, which means that your shoulders are touching your ears. This often leads to a really comfortable position, which is actually quite good to do over the long term and when you start to add more and more load. The next is trying to keep your chin up throughout and looking slightly up at the board, but not downwards, and keeping your head in a neutral position as well. If it starts to move forward or you're looking at your feet, that can often put a lot of stress through your neck, so try and avoid doing that. Just look at the bottom of the fingerboard and make sure that your head is in between your arms at all times. The last is trying to make sure that your back isn't arching too much. We often see people arching their lower back and really starting to pull it into almost like a semi-front lever position, We want to try and avoid that because once again, that's engaging your chest a lot. It's putting a lot of stress through your lower back and your shoulders, and we want to make sure that you're staying more directly hanging underneath the fingerboard. The ideal arm position is going to be either straight or with a slight bend in the elbow. We want to avoid doing like a really deep lock off to begin with because that's a very specific position to train. You want to hang with pretty much straight arms, or if you feel like you've got slightly unstable joints, have a slight bend in the elbow so that your biceps are slightly engaged. So that's our guide on how to begin fingerboard training. The Lattice assessments require anyone to complete a bodyweight hang on a 20mm edge for 10 seconds. That means that they're appropriate for all of the training methodologies we use later on. If you're not quite able to do that yet, but you're interested in doing more benchmarking or doing an assessment or training plan, this is a really good method to build up to that, and you can use those protocols that I mentioned before, which can be found on the Crimped app. It's a really good way to build up to the intensity where you can start doing harder hangs and more complicated training later on. But take your time and build up slowly because it will come. You just need to be consistent and start enjoying the process.